Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
New Home Office data has revealed that asylum seekers are much more likely to be housed in red wall constituencies rather than more affluent ones. We'll be speaking to a red wall MP about what's happening in his local area.
And as the Director General of the BBC comes under fire for allegedly boasting about the licence fee, we'll be joined by former Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport to get his reaction.
And Wales is on a road to nowhere after its government scrapped all new road programmes to save the climate. We'll be debating whether this is a step forward or a step backwards.
And as ever this morning, we want to hear from you, so get involved with the show. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. But before we start, here's the latest headlines with Aaron.
Good morning, it is 10 o'clock. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is expected to urge Western leaders to double down on military support for Ukraine. Rishi Sunak, who's in Munich for a security conference, will tell allies Ukraine needs advanced NATO standard capabilities to counter Russian aggression. The conference is being held days before the first anniversary of Moscow's invasion. The US Vice President, the head of NATO, and China's top diplomats are also attending, but Russian officials have not been invited. And the Prime Minister is also expected to discuss the Northern Ireland Protocol. Rishi Sunak expected to meet European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on the sidelines of the summit in a bid to end the stalemate and reach a deal. There's growing speculation an agreement between the UK and the EU could be unveiled early next week. The body of the former Premier League footballer Christian Atsu has been recovered in Turkey. His agent has confirmed the Ghanaian, who played for Newcastle, Chelsea and Everton, was found under the rubble of his home almost 2 weeks after the earthquakes. More than 45,000 people have been killed in both Turkey and Syria. Rescue efforts continue. And this morning, a child was among 3 people rescued 296 hours after the first quake struck. One of the UK's richest people, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, has reportedly joined the race to buy Manchester United. It comes as Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, the chairman of one of Qatar's biggest banks, confirmed his bid to acquire the club from the Glazer family. Sir Jim has previously expressed his desire to buy United, the club he's supported since childhood, although there's been no formal comment from his company, Ineos. Unions representing university staff have called off their planned strikes over the next 2 weeks. The unions issued a joint statement saying an agreement had been reached on pay and pensions, with a final pay offer of between 5 and 8% from August. However, the 5 planned strikes in mid-March over grading and 0 hours contracts will still go ahead. More memorials are planned to take place this weekend in memory of Brianna Gay, who's stabbed to death last week. It is after hundreds of people gathered in Cheshire last night to remember the 16-year-old. Members of the public have also gathered outside in Birmingham yesterday, with other vigils taking place in Southampton, Nottingham and Edinburgh. Brianna was a transgender girl from Warrington who was found with fatal stab wounds in a park last Saturday. Thousands of homes could be left without power this weekend after Storm Otto swept across Scotland and North East England. The Met Office says winds as high as 80 miles an hour have been recorded, causing trains and flights to be cancelled. The Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks distribution says it sent food vans to the main areas, which are still cut off. And the legal definition of treasure is set to be broadened to help museums keep more artefacts after significant finds. It comes after a surge in the number of detectorists uncovering historical artefacts. Under the current definition, the item needs to be at least 300 years old and be made at least in part of precious metal to be considered a treasure. That's it for the moment. We will bring you more as it happens, but now it is back to Esther and Philip.
Thanks for that update, Aaron. Now, to take a look through the papers this morning, we're delighted to be joined in the studio by broadcaster Claire Muldoon and celebrity chef and TV presenter Kevin Woodford. Morning and welcome to you.
Good morning.
So, Kevin, over to you.
Right, OK. Well, it's interesting because we just heard the news there with another knife attack and somebody killed. You know, and it seems to me that every day when I look at the paper or hear the news, somebody else has been attacked using a knife. And, in fact, knife killings in Britain are the highest since record began in 1946, believe it or not. And right up until March of last year, there were 282 murders, which were down to murders and manslaughters, I should add, which were down to, you know, knives or a sharp blade being used. The government introduced a system in 2017, which was 2 strikes and you're out. Right? So there was a sanctions mechanism put into place. So if you were one of these guys that carried a knife and you were caught twice with it, you had a problem. You really had a problem. You know, you were going to serve a little bit of time. As it is, 4,181 over-16s were up in court for repeat offences using a knife in the year up to September. And only 6 out of 10, actually got a custodial sentence. Now, my worry is I do believe that there has to be some form of sanction mechanism. And it seems to me to be spreading right across the whole of the judiciary. We had a situation, didn't we, where the eco-activists that had blocked the Esso fuel terminal, right, 6 of them, were up before a court the other day. And the judge actually said, these are good people. And I can't criticise their motivation. Now, I go along with that. Say that, by all means, for goodness sake. But at the same time, impose a sentence which is relevant and pertinent to the crime. And I don't think we're getting that. So my fear is...
He did say, didn't he, I am here to look at the law.
Yes.
It's not a moral court, and you might have had sort of certain principles and morals on your side, but he did say this is a court and I am here to enforce the law. But you thought, even though he said that, the sentencing wasn't as stiff as it could have been.
Well, I don't think he should have said it, Esther. I don't see why he would say that. What purpose does that serve in him endorsing, right, the beliefs of certain people? And they can have those beliefs, by all means, but it's what you do in order to enforce, and that's the word, enforce your opinion. And at that point, I don't believe that's a judge's role at all. I really don't.
There is an issue here. I mean, Parliament obviously sets the law for judges then to implement. I think the point you make about knife crime is a very good one, because Parliament quite clearly made it the case that if you're a repeat offender, you will go to prison.
Absolutely.
Now, of course, when we pass laws, of course, we always put a provision in which says, unless it would be unjust to do so. You know, because obviously there may well be an exceptional case somewhere where... But the trouble is that we see this sort of judicial activism where, in effect, judges are deciding what they think the law should be, rather than actually doing what Parliament has instructed them to do. And I think these types of things, they hate it when Parliament says 3 strikes and you're out, 2 strikes and you're out. They hate all that. But rather,
the judges hate that.
The judges hate that because it takes away some of their discretion. But what they're using is a little bit of discretion that they were given to drive a coach and horses through what Parliament intended. And that can't, to me, that can't be right.
So they're growing their role in many ways to give this unnecessary explanation of how they agree with what you don't need it, and then not, as you say, using the 2 strikes and you're out. And all I'm saying is that does permeate into the public. And if they think, I'm not going to be done for a stabbing, stabbing might be then a chosen form of attack.
Absolutely.
And it's brutal.
And there is a sort of a question to be asked, isn't there? I mean, you know, Claire and I were talking about this before we came on, in terms of the growth in those individuals, those young kids carrying knives.
Of the knife.
Absolutely. You know, and you can get a knife. And if you look at my kitchen or your kitchen, and you go into any kitchen shop in the UK or anywhere in the world, you can get a knife that's capable of killing somebody, and there is no debate whether or not you should have that knife. No matter what your age, you can get that.
There was a report last year, actually, post-pandemic, and it said that the accessibility of knives, you're supposed to have a legal limit, I think, of 18 or 16 in order to purchase one. But often, if they were purchased online, they were delivered to the address and there was no checks and balances.
Absolutely.
So if you can't stop people buying knives, which you can't if these are domestic knives, you do have to have then a very strict ruling should you use it and attack somebody.
Exactly.
Your story.
Right, of course, I have to go for Nicola Sturgeon's recent resignation and departure from Scottish politics. Not before time is my view, but I have other views as well, because it was the whole timeline of it was very, very strange. Lord Ashcroft poll on Monday showed, and then, of course, the resignation. Now, Nicola Sturgeon, for all intents and purposes, I don't know why she did it then, but told no one within her inner echelons of the SNP that that was her intention. There has been no succession planning, such narcissistic behaviour of anyone to be a leader of a powerful cabal up in Bute House at the moment, not to have any succession planning. Does she think she's immortal? Come on. Well, the floodgates have now opened, because a week today is the closure of the people who want to put their names into the hat. Of course, you've got Angus Robertson, you've got Kate Forbes, you've got even Hamza Youssef is thinking about leading it. He's driven, you know, the A&E waiting lists, the hospital waiting list in Scotland down the path. He's crippled you know, the NHS in Scotland, and now he thinks he's a good...
Do you have a favoured candidate who you'd
No,
like to see?
I don't want any of them in. I want the whole thing to collapse. Because they've killed Scotland off. They've divided the nation. The SNP have got... They should be hanging their heads in shame.
Now, it's interesting, because I was looking at a story about Nicola Sturgeon in the FT today, and it's, you know, you can't take away from Nicola Sturgeon, great politician and a brilliant at campaigning. But what will her legacy be? What did she leave? And that's what I'm saying. She didn't govern. What did she do? So whether you look at death through drugs, whether you look at education going down, whether you look at the NH going down, whether you look at the cost of living, she did sort of nothing there. But she was a ruthless machine in campaign. If you go back to, 1987, there would have been 50 Labour MPs there, only 3 at SNP. Complete reversal. In fact, the irony of it, they say the Conservative success was pretty much down to her winning all the seats in Scotland. But interestingly, there's also like an investigation as well into the money, £600,000 of funds. What's going on? Could this be why she's left? Because you're quite right. If you don't have succession planning, and we've seen it in the Conservative Party as well, Boris Johnson left quicker than anybody would have thought, and look how that upsets a political party, a governing party, which they are as well. Which is worse.
Do you feel, Claire, that Nicola Sturgeon ran things down in Scotland slightly deliberately in order to create a grievance against the UK government? Because that's always a suspicion.
That's a really interesting point, Phil, because there's a school of thought that is now thinking, what is going to happen if the SNP... Well, they have to have a leader. They are still in the clutches of power in Scotland. But it's the opposite. You know, it's what the Labour MPs and the Conservative MPs in Scotland and the Lib Dems, to a certain extent as well, have to do to keep them out. Because the SNP, what Nicola Sturgeon has always done is blamed Westminster for absolutely everything. Absolutely. Oh, the Supreme Court put the kibosh on the independence review, and the fact now we can't even hold the de facto referendum that I wanted to, which we call the Predendi ref, for the next general election. They can't do it because it's not just.
But why I say she was a fantastic campaigner in her sort of speech when she stood down. Oh, you know,
was all
it's
about her.
No, but it's like, oh, politics is so personalised and polarised. It should be about the policy and not the person. I thought if ever a party made it about the person and not about policy, it was her.
Kevin, are you an unlikely Nicola Sturgeon supporter?
I really... it's not often I would say this, but I really find it difficult to even watch this lady, you know, perform. Because that's what she does. She performs. You've got it in one. She's a campaigner. There's no question about that. But the trouble is, I mean, I used to, as a young guy when I used to work in education, I used to be quite envious of Scotland's educational system because it was fantastic. I mean, there's things like, for example, there's 2/3 of the schools haven't been inspected in Scotland for 5 years. Do you know what I mean? That's ridiculous. The pupil-teacher ratio has been destroyed completely. It goes on and on. And what got me was one of the things that they introduced was for prisoners. I'm going back to my sort of favourite topic here, the judiciary and what have you. She actually they gave prisoners a mobile telephone, right? Which they could get their drugs sorted out, couldn't they, and everything else. Crazy, crazy woman. So I've got no time for the lady whatsoever. And in fact, I wished I'd have been up in Scotland to celebrate with everybody else, you know, doing the hokey pokey or whatever it was they were doing.
Try and get on the side of a victim, whatever that victim was, and then make everybody else the bully. I mean, it was a very clever strategy, even if that victim could be 0.00 whatever of the population. And this is where the overreach went, wasn't it, with the
transgender reform bill.
And that's where, and I thought, my goodness, you would have chucked everything under the bus to get your independence.
And everyone.
And in the end, it was everyone. And it was like womankind, who you would have thought for a feisty female politician, she would have been on their side. Phil, what have you got next?
Well, I wanted to... it's not really a story in the paper, but I wanted to give people an insight into the life of an MP, because this week's been quite typical for me, and I certainly don't want any sympathy. I'm not asking this for sympathy. I just thought I'd give people an insight. But what we get in Parliament is lots of people email with campaigns, and obviously the National Education Union have been on strike. And the union got all of their members to send an email to their local MP to say, will you please support our strike action for our demand for a fully funded, above-inflation pay rise? That was what the email basically said. That's what we want. We've got on strike for fully funded, above-inflation pay rise. Will you support us? Now, I'm one of those, I think I'm probably one of the few MPs who actually personally reads and replies to every single email that I get. Whoever sends it to me, I will reply to them personally. Now, whoever said people want more honest politicians are not telling the truth. Right? They don't. People say they want more honest politicians, but in my experience, they don't. It's a niche market for that.
What, an honest politician's niche?
Well, that is niche as well.
Both are niche.
For the
people wanting them and them being
That's an interesting Venn diagram, isn't it?
I like that.
Well, the people who want one is definitely niche. What they really want is politicians who'll say what they want to hear. That's actually really what they want.
Yeah, everybody wants an echo chamber.
So I replied, and I'll read out what my reply was to the teachers who emailed me. I wrote, "Dear whoever it might be, thank you for your email. I most certainly do not support the strike action of the NEU, which is hugely damaging to pupils and will prevent many people who are paid far less than teachers getting to work themselves, as they will have to stay at home to look after their children. This strike action is both selfish and irresponsible. Best wishes, Philip." Right? That's what I wrote.
By the way, can I say, I want to make a book of Philip's replies, because some of them are crackers. But go on, Phil.
Well, they were asking me what my view was.
Yeah,
I've replied
So that's like a resignation letter, basically.
I've replied with my view. Right.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that was it. Now, what then happens is, and this happens so often
and this
now,
is the pattern. This
is what happens all the
next.
time. Then, one of these teachers puts it up on social media, you see, to say, this, I wrote to my MP, this was his reply. And then the National Education Union, with its 100,000 followers, then sort of piles in and basically highlights my email address, and it encourages everybody then to sort of pile on a sort of a social media pile-on with all these left-wing people calling me every name from a pig to a dog and all the rest of it. Now, I don't care. I mean, I don't care personally. It's all water off a duck's back to me. But you know, this is and it's a deliberate tactic. This is a deliberate tactic, what they do. And they do it for two reasons. One is they want MPs to think, actually, I'll row back on what I said and actually I'll start supporting them. They think that they can intimidate you into changing your mind.
And most of them they can, in a way.
And some they can. They're certainly not with me. They certainly know nothing about me.
Because you've got the staff in your office as well who'll get that intimidation as well.
But also, what they also do it for is to prevent anyone else from speaking out against them. Because what they do is they'll say, you know, another MP will say, well, I don't want all those custard pies being thrown at me. You know, and so it's a deliberate strategy. It's not natural. It's an actual deliberate tactic.
It's definitely not a natural way to conduct a debate.
And the left do this. This is week in, week out. You can pick a subject, you'll get a campaign email, you'll send an honest reply. I mean, they asked me what my opinion was. I told them what my opinion was. They didn't say, you know, anything. They asked me, will I support it? And I just replied and said, no, I won't, because I think it's wrong. And I personally think there's lots of people out there who think it's wrong. If you get outside the echo chamber of the staff room, I think, actually, there's lots of people in the country who think it's wrong, but they don't want to hear it. And I just thought it was a useful insight that people might have into the average week of an MP. And I certainly don't want any sympathy, but I just thought people might want to know.
Does it bother you, Phil, at all? 20,000 emails a year. But, you know, Philip doing a reply like that could get at least 1,000 in a night. And he'll stay up till about 7 in the morning replying to all of them. But I think, again, where is that discourse? Where is the conversation? You're either this side or you're that side, and there's nothing in the middle. And do you know what? Every answer lies in the middle somewhere.
I should say that my dad's a retired teacher, so it's not as if I've got anything against teachers per se.
But does it bother you, Philip? Do you lose sleep over it?
No, it doesn't bother me.
Only when he's doing his emails.
No, it doesn't bother me. And I think, you know, look, being in politics, you expect a lot of grief, don't you? And it's like saying, I'm a football referee and I don't want any abuse. Well, you know, if you don't want abuse, don't be...
You're in the wrong...
And it's the same thing with this. It doesn't bother me at all. It's certainly not going to change my mind. They're not going to change my opinion. But
they need to come to me first if you want to know if you can change Philip's mind, and the answer's no.
Is it getting worse, though? I mean, after the murder of Joe Cox...
It's getting worse,
You know, you would think that, you know...
This is accessibility. Online access, so everything gets worse. Well, look, fantastic, guys. We will see you back in here at 11 o'clock. Kevin, Claire, thank you very much indeed. And Phil, I felt like a confessional.
Did it?
It sort of felt like you were getting that off your chest, and I'm glad you did, because, you know, it's about understanding the inner work.
An insight into the life of an MP.
You did.
Anyway, coming up, we'll be looking at Home Office data, which has shown that 7 times as many asylum seekers are being housed in red wall areas compared to the affluent South East. So stay with us.
Weather's next.
Hello there. Welcome to your Met Office forecast. I'm Craig Snell. So here's the situation for this weekend. Still some rain around, especially across the north of the country, but for the south, it's certainly going to remain very mild. So here's the situation at the moment. We've had a couple of areas of low pressure move through overnight. This one will still continue to track its way eastwards as we go through Saturday. So into this afternoon, we've still got a weather front just lingering across the very far south of the UK, and then this next area of rain just moving into southern Scotland as the afternoon goes on. In between and also across the very far north of Scotland, we will see some bright spells and certainly a calmer day for north east Scotland compared to Friday. But in the sunshine across the Midlands into East Anglia, we could see highs reaching 14, 15, possibly even 16 degrees. So another very mild day to come. Into this evening, the band of rain across Scotland will gradually work its way into the North Sea. This will allow some clearer and colder conditions to develop, so we could see a few icy patches come Sunday morning. Elsewhere, a cooler night than of late, but still on the mild side. Temperatures generally staying up into the mid-single figures. So we start the day on a fairly quiet note across the south, but further north we have this band of rain which will gradually work its way across Scotland as the day goes on, turning quite heavy and persistent and accompanied by a strengthening wind. Northern Ireland, Northern England also rather cloudy, could just see a few outbreaks of rain here, but further south a fairly calm afternoon to come, good sunny spells, especially down towards southwest England, central southern England, and again temperatures reaching 14 or 15 degrees. The area of rain will continue to work its way northeastwards as we go into Sunday evening. Quite a wet and windy night to come across the very far north of Scotland. That will transfer its way a little bit further southwards as we go into Monday. But overall, we start the week on a mild note. But note the temperatures on Wednesday turning colder for all of us by then.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 10:24. Now, we've got a lot of you getting in touch with us this morning, particularly over Sturgeon's resignation.
Yeah, Lindsay from the Highlands says she's one of the most incompetent, secretive, draconian, divisive and toxic politicians I've ever known. Don't sit on the fence, Lindsay. The majority in Scotland are dancing in the streets of this news. Now we need to boot the rest of the poisonous separatist clowns out of Holyrood. Strong opinions there from Lindsay.
And Janet, great comments made by a very sensible panel. Sturgeon, thank goodness she has gone. She's left Scotland in a real mess. Yes, it was all about her.
Pat says, Esther, you say you think Sturgeon was a good politician. Please explain, how do you define a politician? She ran Scotland into the ground. I guess you mean she was very successful at winning elections.
Yeah, and that's what we said, and that was the story in the FT, how great she was at winning elections. Remember, she turned around, got all of the Labour Party out of Scotland, but It was her legacy I was asking about, and it is terrible, as we see. So in that regard, she couldn't deliver. She wasn't a good politician. She was a campaigner.
And George says, hey, Esther and Phil, if people can't change your mind, then why do you allow your party whips to change your mind? Hypocrisy, double standards and just undemocratic basically is the order of your politics. You've been elected to represent your constituents, but guess that doesn't matter to you two.
Oh, see, George. George, have you looked at our voting record?
Matters to me, George. I was going to say, if you were to speak to any of the people who've been my whip, George, I think you'll find...
They can't change your mind either.
They can't change my mind, certainly.
But do you know what? George raised, even though it doesn't really work with us as we're vote against and we do what we want, we are single-minded and represent our constituents, it does raise a very good point, because you're quite right, lots of people will change to fit in with the party, so you are right on that one.
Yes.
So, according to Home Office data, 7 times as many asylum seekers are being housed in red wall areas compared to the affluent South East.
While this can be attributed to various Labour-run councils opting to take in more new arrivals, the data could prove salient in the upcoming general election battle in 2024, where concerns arising immigration may influence the result.
Well, joining us now is the MP for Blackpool South, Scott Benton. And Scott, you can't get more red wall than your seat there. So what is happening in Blackpool? Do you see these figures taking place in your seat?
Good morning, Esther and Philip. Absolutely, I'm afraid your figures very much bear out the picture I see on the ground here in Blackpool. So at the moment, we have approximately 250 asylum seekers in one single hotel. Were it not for me going to the Home Office and suggesting I would be the first to man the barricades and ban a protest if we were to receive more asylum seekers, I suspect we would have probably received hundreds more. And what we are tending to see over the last few years is the likes of those red wall areas, Blackpool, Stoke being a classic example, getting far more asylum seekers than the traditional areas of the home counties and the South East. And this is worrying from a number of different angles. Not just do these red wall areas have more social problems, invariably more pressure on public services, they tend to be more deprived as well. So this is adding additional burdens to the local authorities in those areas compared to more affluent parts of the country, which are probably better placed to assimilate people.
Scott, I just wondered, though, I suppose just to put the other side of the coin, in order to keep the cost to the taxpayer as low as possible, isn't it sort of inevitable that more will be housed and put up in hotels with the lowest accommodation and hotel costs? Isn't that better for the taxpayer than putting them up in sort of flash, expensive, affluent areas, and therefore it's inevitable that that's likely to happen? What would you say to that?
Oh, did you hear us there?
As the bottom line, then clearly there's probably going to be cheaper accommodation in the likes of my constituency, some of those northern mill towns, potentially Bradford, your own district included. So if cost is the bottom line, then you can see why this approach would be followed. However, I think you have to look at the whole perspective here, and it's completely immoral that northern councils who are already facing significant challenges have to adjust to this extra burden, while those southern councils, who tend to be more affluent, tend to have less social pressures placed upon them, are getting away scot-free. And the classic example, for example, would be Scotland, where we hear SNP members of Parliament regularly criticising the government for not being hospitable, not taking more asylum seekers, and yet the number of Scottish local authorities taking new people into the country is shockingly low. So there is an imbalance across the country here, but we have to look at both things, not just the bottom line to the taxpayer, but the broader picture of how this is affecting communities such as Blackpool, when they have hundreds of extra people placed upon them.
Scott, talking about how it's affecting people locally, what are the tensions on the ground? We saw last week in Knowsley, on Merseyside, the tensions flaring there. What are you having to deal with? And this is something as well the government needs to be aware of.
Those shocking images, as you've said. Touch wood, we don't have any similar tensions in Blackpool, so to speak, but what I can tell you is this has been the #1 issue in my post bag for the last 3 years. I can barely knock on a door in Blackpool or go to the pub for a local pint without somebody tapping me on the shoulder and saying, for goodness sake, get a grip of the small boats crisis. And when on earth is the Home Office going to start processing people who are already here to make sure we can frequent some of those hotels like I have in Blackpool? So I think the public are sick and tired of this issue. I think the Home Office understand this, certainly the political leadership from the Home Secretary. We've been promised legislation from the Prime Minister. This needs to come through now as a matter of urgency, because the longer this goes on, I'm afraid there is more and more of a fear that we will see those images in Knowsley last week repeated elsewhere across the country.
Scott Benton, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.
I thought he raised a good point there, though, when he said about, you know, these people who say that they want more refugees. And I always think, well, there's a simple solution here. Why don't we send the asylum seekers to the areas where the MP says that they want more of them to come into the country, or where they're trying to stop them from being removed from the country? Then surely everybody's happy.
Well, you see, I read, it's a very good piece in the Mail today, and it was talking about Ireland, where they opened the borders and they said, we do want more immigrants, come here. And actually, the effects that is happening there, they thought maybe a couple of thousand people would be coming there. They're not, they're into tens of thousands. 1 in 4 hotel beds have now got asylum seekers in, totally changing the nature of the area, which was more of a tourism centre, but not anymore. And this is the problem, isn't it? You've got a backlog of 140,000 asylum claims, got to be done, shortage of accommodation, and they're going into hotels.
Now, it's all over the papers this morning. The Director General of the BBC is alleged to have boasted at an internal BBC meeting about the licence fee, saying it's truly amazing what we're pulling off, that most households are happy paying the licence fee being a forced payment.
We're now joined by former Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, John Whittingdale. So, John Whittingdale, I know you will have read those comments there by Tim Davie. Were they boastful? Were they out of place? Or was he just being honest?
Well, I think actually it showed a degree of awareness about the good fortune of the BBC in having a guaranteed source of income, which people are required to pay, no matter what their current state of their own finances. It's enforced by law, and it means that the BBC doesn't have to face the same degree of competition and operate in the commercial marketplace. All of that is absolutely true. Now, I mean, I think he says it's amazing that people seem willing go on paying it. I suspect that is changing. We are seeing more and more people, particularly younger people, saying that they don't see the need to pay the licence fee any longer. They don't watch the BBC. And I've always believed that the licence fee is probably the least worst for the moment, but that it cannot continue indefinitely. And it may be that Tim Davie is beginning to see that.
But it doesn't say much for the BBC, does it, John, that the only way that they can get people to pay for their products is by the criminal law forcing people to pay whether they want to or not, whether they want to watch their material or not. Surely it's a massive anachronism in this day and age to have that in place when there are so many channels. Surely they should compete like everybody else in the open market and go to subscription. And if it's so popular and such good value for money, presumably everyone will be queuing up to pay for it. So what have they got to worry about?
Well, the problem is, though, you can only have a subscription channel if you have a smart TV with an internet connection. And there are still a lot of people who rely on Freeview. They don't have smart TVs. They get their TV through the aerial, and you can't have a subscription system on that system. So for the moment, subscription is not really a viable proposition. I think that will change. I think in time everybody will get their TV via the internet, and when we reach that point, then subscription is a possibility. And the BBC and indeed the government are beginning to talk about a mixed model, about introducing some services voluntarily on subscription. And I think that has to be the direction in which we will eventually move.
Now, I thought he was quite honest here. You know, it was a private meeting. I love the way private meetings now are being leaked to everybody in one way or another.
And it just doesn't happen in
politics. And it was obviously against him. But when he said, look, our budgets are slightly better than those of the commercial stations, and we've got a long game, we've got a long plan there, and we don't need to make a profit. I thought he was setting out to all the staff the obvious there. We need to understand how cosseted we are, what a sort of position we are in, a privileged position, and therefore we need to wake up to that.
Well, Esther, I agree with you, and that was slightly how I read it. What I think is a bit of a shame is that whilst he was prepared to say that to his staff in private, that's not his public message. His public message has been, oh, we're subject to this terrible squeeze on our finances. We're going to have to cut back local radio, which I think is a huge mistake. I think it's one of the things the BBC is really good at, is local radio, and they should not be removing services in the way that they're proposing. So, what he says in private about how fortunate they are is in direct opposite of what the BBC says to the government, which is, you are squeezing us, we can't afford to go on providing all these services, we haven't got enough money.
I mean, the one thing they certainly don't seem to be able to cut is Gary Lineker. It'd certainly suit me if they managed to cut Gary Lineker out of the schedule. But taking that aside, how long do you think the licence fee's got, John? What if you were looking into the future, how long do you think it's got before it becomes impossible to continue with?
Well, I think part of the BBC's problem is that the number of people who are not paying it is likely to go on rising. And so it is going to be subject to that squeeze, and it's going to look more and more anachronistic. But when we get to the point where we can switch off the Freeview transmission because everybody is now linked up with broadband and getting their TV, that's the moment. And I suspect that's still something like 10 years away. But that time will come.
Final point, which did make me smile, he said, addressing the bias issue, there's a whole load of waffle talked about, the left. It's largely now about societal issues, that's climate change, woke, etc. So bias of the left, of the BBC, still got to be concerned about that, wake up to the fact of what they are.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that he seems to concede that there is a bias in those areas. And actually, that is one of the areas where you get a lot of complaint, particularly about the sort of woke agenda which seems to possess the BBC and the obsession with sort of what appears on screen, what doesn't appear on screen, the absolute dismissal of people who have a different view about, be it COVID virus or climate change or any number of other things. These are questions around the impartiality of the BBC. And actually, if Tim Davie recognises that they still have more work to do in that area, that's a good thing.
John Whittingdale, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. And another controversial point was, stopping paying the licence fee for the over 75s, £159 a year. And most people say, why? What do we get? Why are we still paying it? And I absolutely agree. Now, coming up, we'll be discussing the decision from the Welsh Government to cancel all major road building projects due to the environmental concerns. Forwards, backwards, what do you think? But whatever you do, don't go anywhere.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Welcome back. It's 10:40. Lots of you have been getting in touch.
Particularly about the number of asylum seekers going into red wall areas rather than more affluent areas. Judy says, why hasn't Scotland taken more? Surely that would have been right up Sturgeon's street. Graham says, why on earth do our Border Force and RNLI park themselves in the mid-channel and simply offer them a taxi service to the UK? They know this and abuse it. Let them struggle to get here, arrest them and deport them, says Graham. James says they're putting migrants in red wall areas to deter more from coming. If they put them in more affluent areas, it would attract even more here.
Anyway.
Keep those views coming in. Now, all major road building projects in Wales have been cancelled, with the Welsh Government blaming environmental concerns. The Welsh Government says it puts climate change at the heart of decision-making, but opponents have argued that it's anti-car and it will harm the Welsh economy.
Well, we're now joined by the founder of Fair Fuel UK, Howard Cox. So you will have read this like we will have read this, but just a thought, and I'm placing it with you. Shouldn't the motorist take some pain for the environment?
Hello, Esther. Hello, Philip. Lovely to be on your show. Look, here we go again. I mean, the whole country, in terms of local authorities, local councils, and even the devolved councils, etc., and governments, etc., especially the wonderful Greater London one by Mayor Khan, are totally anti the car. They're trying to stop us driving, and it is wrong. Now, drivers are already nearly the highest tax drivers in the world. Due to our work and your support in the backbench MPs like yourselves, we've managed to have a freeze in fuel duty for the last 10, 12 years. But what's happening here is absolutely crass stupidity. It's economic and political suicide. What are they doing? It's pure virtual signalling. There's no proof that building an extra road, which will actually take off a lot of the congestion elsewhere where there is pollution, might actually help. And I heard Mark Dreyfus say something about that. We've got to save the planet. But which planet is he on? He's trying to save, because what he's doing is stopping the economy actually motoring. It's ridiculous.
Howard, you say that it's political suicide as well as economic suicide. I just wondered. I mean, you do a fantastic job standing up for motorists, speaking out for motorists on a regular basis. But given how many motorists there are in the country, why do you think they seem to be such an ineffective political force? And they seem to be trampled over by people who represent far fewer people. Why do you think that is? It's always intrigued me.
It's a very, very good question, and I get frustrated by it all the time. There's a lot of disparate groups, and a lot of the groups that are actually representing motorists are profit-driven. The IA, the RAC type bodies, Green Flag, they represent shareholders rather than their drivers. So they're looking at how they're pricing. I am totally independent, as you know. I'm totally voluntary. I don't take a penny out of anything. I've got 1.7 million very aggravated supporters who need their car, need their vehicles to go in places. And I regularly try and bring people together. And I get frustrated by this. But as you know, Philip and Esther, when the Treasury sit down each year before an autumn statement or a budget, they've got this little set of boxes ticked. Now, where are we getting our fifth largest income from reliably every year? And guess what? That's drivers, without fail. And I'm afraid there's apathy. And if you remember in the year 2000, just around that, there was the blockade around London with the truckers' blockade. And that's when petrol was only 60, 70 pence. Now we're looking at 150, 170. You think, but I think people are actually battle weary, they're battle fatigued, they're campaign apathy. There's a lot of people, what can we do about it? And we don't glue ourselves to roads. We don't do things like that. We just try and do objective stuff, which I do with you guys.
Howard, coming back to the point about the roads, do you fear that where Wales leads, the rest of the United Kingdom will follow? Do you think that this is something realistically, this end of new roads, is this something that you think realistically may well now start to happen across the whole of the United Kingdom?
Well, I sincerely hope not, because one of the things we did, and I did produce a report about 3 years ago, I commissioned the CBR to say the benefit of actually producing new road projects and bypasses and things like versus how much money is being spent on railways. And the actual return in terms of actually the economic growth measured through GDP growth was if you invest in roads, you get 4 times more return than you do for investing in railways. And that's the sort of thing that we should be pushing much more and more. The most important thing is we do need a good public transport system too. I mean, obviously in London and places like some of the major cities.
I'm just going to draw you to a close there because we've got to speak to somebody else about this subject. So thank you very much there for joining us.
Yeah, let's now welcome climate columnist for The Independent, Donncha McCarthy. Donncha, thank you for joining us. I'm presuming that you support the Welsh Government's position here, but doesn't not building any roads just lead to more congestion, and more congestion in the roads leads to more pollution, and therefore isn't it sort of counterintuitive to think that this is good for the environment?
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Well, if you look at the M25, for the last 30 years, we've kept adding lane after lane, and congestion is up and pollution is up. Look at Los Angeles. If you demolish the entire city of Los Angeles, you'll still have the cars. No matter how many lanes you build, it will be clogged up. So what we need, we've been doing this for 70 years. It's not worked. And all praise to the Welsh Government for starting to actually look in a different direction of looking at reducing congestion and facilitating the businesses and the freight that do need our roads. What we need to do is get short journeys off our roads, so to facilitate the economy and health and climate change.
But Donncha, it seems a curious argument to say that, you know, that you build more roads and they get clogged up. I mean, surely that's just a signal that they're needed, that there's a demand for that. It's like saying there's no point building any more houses because you just build more houses, people live in them, and you need even more houses. It seems to be a curious argument for saying that we don't need more roads when you say that whenever you build more roads, they get full. Surely that's the reason why you do need them, not why you don't need them.
If you actually facilitate one of the most inefficient ways of transport, which is a metal box with 2 tons and 1 person in them, rather than facilitating more sustainable process such as public transport, buses, cycling and walking, you're condemned to putting more and more of our roads under concrete, more carbon emissions, more homes destroyed and more kids' lives blighted. What we need to do is to start a new process, which Wales is doing, is maximising safety. What they have done is that they're maximising safety, maximising connection to new housing developments and economic zones, and actually facilitating a move away from the motor car, which has been an absolute disaster for Britain. The war on humanity by the car industry has got to stop.
Okay. Donncha, can I ask a question? Because I've got 2 thoughts here. One, you're putting the cart before the horse because people need to get around and they haven't got other ways of getting around, or the convenience. You've got a family, you've got kids, you need to do shopping, drop them off, and all of this isn't there for public transport. So you're going to inconvenience lots of people for a long period of time. So how would you address, that?
Well, 95% of people in London travel to work without using a car. Imagine that. And Howard Cox wants us to actually...
Where was that? In London?
London.
Yeah, but did you say in London was that? But we're not all in London. Where most of us live is not in London, and we need to get around. And otherwise, it could be on rural roads, a long way to get to wherever we're going to. We're not all connected with transport, public transport like that.
Esther, nearly 85% of Britons live in urban areas. And what we're doing is investing all the money on the car owners, and we're not focusing on people and on families and on business that need different types of transport. And what the Welsh Government are doing is saying, rather than investing all of the billions in new roads, is they're using some of that money to invest in active travel and public transport.
So you can cycle everywhere. Cycle and walk. So what we're going to do, and that was the second part of the point I had, if you can't travel on public transport, we can only live within, a 2-mile radius of everything that we do, so that we can get there by walking and by cycling.
Well, in an ideal world, I mean, the planners and international experts are saying, ideally, we should have facilities within 15 minutes of our home so that you can get to the doctor, you can get to the shops, you can get to the library, you can get to your school without having to use a car and the expense and damage it causes. It makes a win-win. Better society, better transport and better economy.
Donica McCarthy, thank you so much indeed for taking the time to join us this morning. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Now, Donica might think that that's a better way of living just in a case sort of environment, but it's a serious control that if you can only go within a couple of mile radius.
What I don't understand is if everyone's supposed to be going on electric cars, why are they so against roads? It seems that they just don't like people in cars. It seems to be more about...
So you're saying now that we've got electric, a greener, cleaner...
Well, that was always the argument against cars.
I'm just worried about how they're closing your life down.
Exactly.
Instead of expanding it, they're closing it down to a...
Yeah. It's more to do with that than actual... That's what I think. Anyway, the Crown Prosecution Service will start recording the ethnicity of people charged under the controversial joint enterprise legislation following a legal challenge that it unfairly targets black men and boys.
While campaigners have claimed the law is discriminatory, the push to remove it may endanger the lives of those living in areas blighted by gang-related violent crime. We're now joined by Rory Gagan, the director of the Public Safety Foundation. So these new rules, what's going to be the consequences of them, this research they're doing now?
Well, good morning, Esther and Philip. Thanks for having me on. I think the first thing to say is obviously there's nothing wrong with anyone wanting to understand how our police or criminal justice system works. Indeed, I think at the moment a lot of people are wondering if it even works at all. Just look at the Just Stop Oil type stuff, for instance. I think what we've seen, and we've seen this before with Stop and Search, what we've seen is that gathering data on ethnicity, which is this latest development in terms of the joint enterprise stuff, on its own does little or nothing to advance understanding or improve public safety. We're in an era today of identity politics. The data will inevitably be used or misused, should I say, to suggest that the only explanation and the only possible explanation, the only acceptable explanation is one of racial discrimination. And of course, we see it with, various other things, Stop and Search, where people are more familiar with stats like, being stopped and searched if you're, black, being 5 or 6, 7, 8 times more likely. But the more sort of compelling stat, arguably, the one of being 8 times more likely to be the victim of a homicide on our streets if you're black than if you're white in London, that doesn't get the airtime. So I think the short version from this latest news is that essentially the data will be published and it will basically be copy and pasted into various news outlets who will then use it to attack the Crown Prosecution Service, attack the police for prosecuting too many black people, never mind the fact that, of course, the police and the prosecutors have to deal with crime as it presents itself. They don't really have that much discretion, shall we say, over victims of homicide in particular. And joint enterprise, as anyone familiar with it would know, has been used successfully in cases, high-profile ones going back years, Ben Kinsella, Stephen Lawrence, Gary Newlove, just to name but a few. And so this sort of regular onslaught against our criminal justice system and our police and those men and women who are determined to sort of try and keep our streets safe, I don't think it shows any signs of ending.
Rory, I mean, people have sort of criticisms of joint enterprise generally in the sense that they say, well, how can it be fair that you're charged with murder even if you didn't commit the fatal act yourself, or that it convicts innocent people who just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time but are scared of implicating the people who were responsible. What would you say to people who have those criticisms of joint enterprise generally?
Well, look, the law will always evolve over time, and there was a Supreme Court judgment not so long ago that sort of clarified and suggested there'd been a misinterpretation. I think it's only common sense, really, when you think about, if you have 2 or 3 men or women kicking someone to death on the street and you have a number of individuals with them, egging them on, encouraging them, determined to encourage them to continue to essentially murder that person, I think it's perfectly common sense to suggest that those individuals should be held to account for their actions. And this principle of, essentially dealing with people in as much a preventative sense as anything, we see that with other offences too. We see it with things like going equipped to steal. We see it with things like conspiracy. We see it with a whole range of offences that seek to send a very clear signal that this sort of conduct, this sort of criminal conduct, is unacceptable. So the law may evolve over time. I don't have a problem with the law evolving, but it's vital we keep the streets safe.
Rory Gagan, thank you so much indeed for joining us this morning to talk about joint enterprise.
And he ended there on safe streets, and that's what we want. And I was working with a campaign group, Families Fighting for Justice, Jean Taylor, for many years, because people would hide behind a group of them, not saying who did it, and then nobody sort of got... held to account for the crime that was committed.
Yeah, no, I agree about that.
So joint enterprise definitely has a place. Now, we've got a couple of minutes left in this hour, and as you know, GB News is the People's Channel. The most important thing is to hear your voices. Well, we're delighted to be joined by GB viewers Stephen Bell and Lynn Park. Hello to you both. Stephen, taxi driver there in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. I tell you, all the viewers seem to have a view on her. What do you think? Are you glad she's gone?
I think she had to go. I think she's boxed herself into a corner with the GRR bill, and it's indefensible. I don't think she'd anywhere left to go.
Is there anybody you'd like to see replace her, Stephen? Have you got a particular favourite candidate?
I think the only one that would be plausible would be Kate Forbes, but I think it may be too early for her, to be honest.
Yes, and this is the very young politician, sort of in the finance department, as it were. I found it interesting because she's a religious, as it was, the most religious of them. Is this a sort of, how can we say, a sort of in opposition to what maybe Nicola was doing with the transgender movement? Do you think the SNP might want to go for somebody who's more religious?
I think if they want to progress any further, they're going to have to come back into the centre ground. They've went far too much to the left, and a lot of mainstream people, they're just not going to accept this. The implications of this bill are dangerous, I would say.
Were you ever sympathetic with the SNP, or have you always not been a fan of Nicola Sturgeon or Alex Salmon?
I voted SNP for 35 years. I can remember, as you said earlier, when they had 3 MPs in Westminster and we were labelled tartan Tories and all the rest of it, and they were backed by a lot of people, myself included. But in the last 8 years, I can't support them anymore. No, I'm politically homeless at the moment, to be perfectly honest.
Lynn, I think you're in Wrexham there in North Wales. We were just discussing earlier about this ban on new roads being built in Wales. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't think it's going to be very popular. I'm not for it myself. The public transport system around here isn't particularly accessible or available. I don't use it a lot myself, I must admit, but we did take a trip last weekend, Transpennine, on the train. We booked tickets. We turned up at Wrexham Station. This was the first train journey I've had in years, and the train was cancelled, and we had to have a coach to take us up to Chester to get and we just about got the connection to go over to Yorkshire, which was where we were going. Fortunately, we were picking up a car and we drove back, so we didn't have to do a return journey.
And that's exactly what I said in this debate. It's great comparing everywhere with London, but the rest of the country does not have that public transport.
Good choice going to Yorkshire, though, Lynn. Good choice, good decision to go to Yorkshire. I've got to support your decision-making process. Look, thanks to Stephen and Lynn. Thanks for joining us and coming on the show this morning, and keep watching GB News.
And talking about what we were talking about today as well, getting a real sense on the ground about what people think of those stories. So thanks to our GB viewers there, Stephen and Lynn. That's it for the first hour of the show, but we'll be back very soon. We'll be joined by a former police officer who was duped by her lover in an unbelievable story, so you must join us for that. Don't go anywhere.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Saturday Morning with Esther and Philip here on GB News.
Now, how much do you really know about the person you're dating, especially when you meet them online? We're going to be speaking to a police officer who was duped by an armed robber, which was the start of her life falling apart.
Unbelievable, her life story there. And then another family here, I call them gripped by TikTok. The daughter is a global superstar with 89 million followers. I can't even comprehend 89 million followers. The dad's got over 5 million followers. So we're going to be talking to the dad to say what's it like living your life on social media and what's it like having a daughter like Addison Rae, that famous. Join us later for that.
And Labour MP Peter Dowd is fighting for a 4-day working week with no loss of pay. Is it too good to be true? We'll be asking him just that.
And as ever, we want to hear from you, so get involved with the show. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. But before all that, here's the latest headlines with Aaron.
Good morning, it's just after 11 o'clock. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is expected to urge Western leaders to double down on military support for Ukraine. Rishi Sunak, who's in Munich for a security conference, will tell allies Ukraine needs advanced NATO standard capabilities to counter Russian aggression. The conference is being held days before the first anniversary of Moscow's invasion. The US Vice President, the head of NATO, and China's top diplomat are also attending, but Russian officials have not been invited. And the Prime Minister will also discuss the Northern Ireland Protocol while he's there. Rishi Sunak, who's been greeted by the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, is expected to hold talks with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on the sidelines of the summit. There's growing speculation an agreement between the UK and the EU over Northern Ireland is close and could be unveiled early next week. The body of former Premier League footballer Christian Atsu has been recovered in Turkey. His agent confirmed the Ghanaian, who played for Newcastle, Chelsea and Everton, was found under the rubble of his home almost 2 weeks after the earthquake struck. More than 45,000 people have been killed in Turkey and Syria. Rescue efforts continue, though. This morning, a child was amongst 3 people rescued 296 hours after the first quake struck. One of the UK's richest people, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, has reportedly joined the race to buy Manchester United. It comes as Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, the chairman of one of Qatar's biggest banks, confirmed his bid to acquire the club from the Glazer family. Sir Jim has previously expressed his desire to buy United, the club he has supported since childhood, although there has not yet been a formal comment from his company Ineos. Railway engineering workers are planning to walk out next month in a dispute over pay. Members of the RMT union at Balfour Beatty will hold 3 48-hour strikes on the 3rd, 10th and 17th of March. They rejected the company's offer of a 5.5% increase in pay to be backdated to April last year. Meanwhile, unions representing university staff have called off planned strikes over the next 2 weeks. Issuing a joint statement, they said an agreement has been reached on pay and pensions with a final pay offer of between 5 and 8% from August. However, the 5 planned strikes in mid-March over grading and 0 hours contracts will still go ahead. North Korea's fired a long-range ballistic missile into the sea off its east coast. The move comes a day after Pyongyang warned of a strong response as the US and South Korea prepare for annual military drills. North Korea fired an unprecedented number of missiles last year, including those with the ability to strike anywhere in the United States. More memorials are planned to take place this weekend in memory of Brianna Gay, who was stabbed to death last week. It's after hundreds of people gathered in Cheshire last night to remember the 16-year-old. Members of the public have also come together in Birmingham. That happened yesterday, with other vigils taking place in Southampton, Nottingham and Edinburgh. Brianna was a transgender girl from Warrington who was found with fatal stab wounds in the park last Saturday. Almost 2,000 homes which lost power during Storm Otto have still not been reconnected to the grid. The Met Office says the storm has well and truly cleared, but homes across Aberdeenshire remain without power. It says the storm has now left the UK, though, and is affecting Scandinavia. The Scottish and Southern electricity networks say it sent food vans to the main areas that remain cut off from supplies. It said it hopes to restore power by the end of the day. And the legal definition of treasure is set to be broadened to help museums keep more artefacts after significant fines. It comes after a surge in the number of detectorists uncovering historical artefacts. Under the current definition, the item needs to be at least 300 years old and be made at least in part of a precious metal that could be considered a treasure. This is GB News. More as it happens, but now back to Esther and Phil.
Thanks, Aaron. Lots of you have been getting in touch, particularly about Wales government, the Welsh government, deciding not to build those new roads.
Not much support for Mark Drakeford here from looking at these comments. Nikki says if Wales don't build new roads as a Labour policy, then what would a Labour government introduce in England if elected?
Yeah. Andrew said zero-emission vehicles still need roads. Just saying.
Susan says, I'm English and live in a beautiful part of Wales. The issue of the Welsh Government cancelling all road building projects is just another example of why we should cancel devolution. Drakeford and co will have us all riding round on a horse and cart. They're also hell-bent on killing tourism.
And Les Drakeford, what a funny man he is in Wales. So is he hoping people will stop driving? Well, then he is a fool. He should follow that other silly leader who has just stepped down in Scotland.
And Rosemary from Newbury says these people haven't given any consideration to people who cannot cycle or walk. What about older people who have reduced mobility? Keep those views coming in. We're coming in on all sorts of different issues, but they were. Yeah. We thought we'd cover some of those.
Well, we're joined again in the studio by broadcaster Claire Muldoon and celebrity chef and TV presenter Kevin Woodford. Hello again to you both. Claire, starting with you.
Right, so on the back of the Mark Drakeford story that you've just done, actually I've picked up an article in today's Telegraph about ULEZ fines.
Oh.
Now, come on, if Drakeford's not going to build any roads, then how on earth is he going to use this stealth tax that Sadiq Khan introduced in London and has now gone nationwide? In Scotland, they're in Aberdeen, Dundee, Edinburgh and Glasgow. For me, it's nothing more than a stealth tax, OK, on those that want to drive. Yeah. Now, here, they've reported that the fines have actually been issued in error. And this is because the computer at DVLA picks up from the EMPR, or whatever it's called, the acronym, whatever it is, the number plate. And if your car emits the certain emissions that it doesn't like, then you're fined, right? But what happens to those people mid-month, beginning of the month, end of month, that buy a new car, that actually want to help or perceive that they're actually helping the environment, buy a car that's actually regulated for the ULEZ, and they change the number plate, but it's not picked up. And the DVLA system is so archaic that it cannot register the fact that it's actually now registered to a different car that is actually admissible no pun intended, to actually work in the US.
But I think when you're talking about a stealth tax, and if you speak to every taxi driver, anybody who's driving a van, anybody who runs a business, they say it is just a stealth tax.
Yes.
And in a way, Wales, or the Welsh Government, deciding not to build roads, that's kind of not spending out. So again, it's a sort of a river. It's all about money.
Sure.
I'd love to know where that money is going.
George, one of our viewers, says, I have the misfortune to live in the one-party state, which Wales now is. If they stop building roads, what are they going to do with all the money? Because they still tax us, to quote a Labour Chancellor, until the pip squeak. So George pretty much saying what you're saying there.
Exactly.
Claire.
Pick up the George in Wales.
Absolutely. Kevin.
Yeah, well, I'm still hanging on to my diesel plugging vehicle, come and bring it on.
Shame on you, eh?
I don't care anymore.
No,
I've given up.
You know, like Philip warned you in section 1 about what happens, all those thousands of emails
I don't care.
come to you. They'll now all be coming to you with the diesel.
The email address is Philip Davis. Well, on another note, I mean, we keep ranting on about we're paying 159 quid to have a BBC TV licence, and if we don't have that, we can't have our TV on, right? So, so that's what's been happening, and it all gone a bit quiet. The Nadine Dorries thing that had gone away, and everybody's keeping quiet about it. That perhaps there's not going to be a review. We don't know what's going to happen with regards to this licence fee. And the man who should have said nout has made it really bad for himself. So this is the Director General, bless you. I worked for the BBC for 25 years and I've got the greatest respect for them. I think they make some fantastic programmes. But we're in a different century now. And I think, we're entitled to say we don't want that particular service. And if we do want it, we're happy to pay a subscription fee for that, OK? But what he actually said, he was talking to some BBC staff at BBC South, and he said, quote, and I'll be very careful what I say so that we're absolutely accurate, he said, "It's amazing that we are pulling this off. Most households are happy to pay this forced payment fee." I would disagree with you, Tim. I don't think most households are happy to pay that forced. He also said, "It's glorious that the BBC has better budgets than some commercial channels who are struggling financially." Now, maybe I'm wrong, but if I was heading up the BBC, which thank the Lord I'm not, sir, I don't think I would actually state that where it could be then passed around the country. So that now has really brought up the whole process of, are we right to be paying 159 quid for a TV licence for programmes that meet... But I don't know how often I watch the BBC anymore, to be quite honest with you.
You mean you didn't watch Happy Valley? I think
that's the only thing. So
no,
you're paying all that money for Happy
It's
Valley.
not the only thing. I love the BBC, and I think
Watch
it's
it that much.
tremendous value for money because you get all the radio stations, you get the iPlayer, you can get the podcast, you get BBC Sounds, and also because they still are the British Broadcasting Company, they still have members of their journalistic team practically in every single country in the world.
But if it's great value for money, why do they need the criminal law to force people to pay it? I mean, presumably people would be quite happy to pay.
Claire, I agree with you. I think it's a fantastic organisation, and
it's great value for money.
It is great value for money, but we should have the choice as to whether we actually want to use that.
You do have the choice.
Yeah, no, we don't, because if we don't pay the licence, we can't have our TV on. You can't watch Sky.
And you get prosecuted.
You're going to get prosecuted.
It's the prosecution side of it as well.
But remember, when you say it's great value for money, I'm just going to throw in that it is £4 billion when they get 159 quid on. It is £4 billion, and then it can dominate the whole of the media landscape because it's got this £4 billion.
Yes, but also, Esther, you have to remember, over 75s, I think, don't pay for it.
They still they do now.
Well, they do now. They change it, except for if you're on pension credit.
Yeah.
Right, OK. So there might be a lot of pensioners that are on credit. It's something that's still free. Netflix is expensive. It's $7.99, and they were wanting to reduce it because I've got my 4 kids all pile onto the memberships.
Oh, and you can't talk about that.
So, but not for the licence fee, right? Which is fine. But, it's $7.99 or $12.99 a month for Netflix.
Well, at least you get a choice.
Sky...
At least you get a choice.
What do you mean, Phil?
At least you get a choice. You don't have to pay. If you don't want to, you don't pay it.
You don't need to pay if you've got a laptop.
Yeah, well, I mean, look... I'd love to know what...
Have I started something here?
Yes, you have.
You have. Anyway...
I was going to ask something completely different. But I won't... Well, I'll just throw it out there. private meeting with private staff, and it gets leaked. Obviously, people are trying to cause trouble in one way or another. They're trying to get rid of the chairman.
But
or they're trying to get rid of the DG. Anyway, that's just another
But it's
thought.
not a whistleblowing comment.
No. Now, just to lighten the mood, I never thought, when doing a paper review, that I would ever read something from Dear Deirdre in The Sun.
I didn't know you had... I didn't realise this was a guilty pleasure of yours.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Are you on first-name terms?
Oh, you can't. Most of these are mine, to be perfect. But this was... I hate to add, the first one might not be, but this is... what about this one? This was an absolute belter, I thought, in Dear Deirdre today. Dishy Rishi fuels all my fantasies. My obsession with Rishi Sunak is driving away my boyfriend. I know my dreams and fantasies about the Prime Minister won't ever become reality, but I can't stop thinking about him. I'm 29 and my boyfriend's 31. My crush on Rishi started during COVID. I don't think I'm alone in feeling like this. I
want to know what the answer is. What the hell advice
did she
It's starting to ruin my relationship. He said, my boyfriend keeps saying, you're thinking about Rishi again, aren't you? Now, Deirdre says...
It's not signed Esther McVeigh.
Deirdre says, crushes are generally harmless, especially when they're on someone as unattainable as the Prime Minister, but your crush is unhealthy as it's preoccupying you and close to wrecking your home life. So she's got
What was the girl's name?
It doesn't say. It's
Right, I reckon.
Well,
you know that Banksy.
Anonymity, she asked for that.
You know that Banksy that's just been done?
Yeah.
And it looked as if it was Rishi's legs hanging out the fridge. I think it was her boyfriend that removed the fridge and put it into cold storage.
So, I mean, ask our viewers, was this you? Do any of our viewers have fantasies about Dishy Rishi? But
they want to admit to.
I wasn't expecting that in Dear Deirdre today, I must admit.
No, we weren't expecting it on the programme.
Wasn't expecting you to bring it up.
No.
Well, I don't know if I can follow that with this. This is a story, page 8 of The Times. Neglect of Commonwealth gives Beijing chance to seize influence. And what I was reading, all week we've been talking about China, whether it's been observing what people are doing, the balloons, etc., what's going on in America, what's happening across the globe. But really, it's the 50-year plan of China to expand its reach into the whole of the world. So you might be concerned now about those balloons watching what you're doing. Probably the least thing to be worried about in a way. You've got people talking about TikTok, and we've got a family on later TikTok that Chinese company, observe what you do. But this really is about how it has increased its power with every country across.
Of course it has. It owns Africa.
Exactly, the African nations and the Caribbean. But what it's doing, and it's making sure that therefore will overwhelm and have the whole-scale destruction of international bodies, because these now vote en masse with China because they're beholden to one way or another, whether it's money, whether it's their education system, whether it's tech. And I thought the inner workings of China and the inner takeover of the world was far more important in a way than those balloons, but maybe it's got us talking. But an interesting article to read, how China is taking over and the threat from within.
Do you not think people might say, well, people in the UK can't really criticise about this because it's what's different to this to what the British Empire was like in the past? What would you say to
Well, then they'd say, I guess the world is then moving. Are we moving fundamentally on our axis from the west to the east now? Is that dominance coming through? Is the next superpower, well, we've thought for some time, the China and how it's going? And then people will say, but what about democracy versus communism?
I tell you what,
are we doing? Is it state control rather than freedom of the individual?
They won't like the potential of a 4-day week, will they?
No, we're talking about that a little bit later as well. The 4-day week, getting paid the same amount, staying at home an extra day.
Brilliant idea.
Anybody else got another story for us?
Yes.
Good.
Water shambles in the NHS. I can't believe this. Bring back matrons to hospitals, I say, because hospitals have been hit by hundreds of sewage leaks. That's disgusting. There's reports of patients slipping on excrement on the floor out of their beds. Hospitals are supposed to be the paradigm of cleanliness. And yet, if you go there, you're taking your life in your hands, it would seem, in terms of picking up MRSA bugs or actually in a worse situation leaving hospital than you actually were when you went in.
Do you know, sometimes you pick up a story and you start reading it and you go, no, that can't be true.
But it is true.
Well, but that was one of those stories. I thought,
Esther,
no, surely that can't be happening.
It's not Victorian.
How is it happening?
Well, they're saying that the hospitals have lacked investment and stuff like that, but we all know the NHS has never been funded more than it is at the moment. OK, it's bad management.
It is, Claire,
it's bad management.
And it's wider than that, because, I mean, with that particular story in mind, a lot of the utility companies, the water utility companies around the country, are dumping as well into beautiful areas where there's a threat to crabs, shellfish in general. You know, I mean, if you think about it, you've got the hospital going on, you've got, you know, the whole of the ecosystem is completely being destroyed by this. I think in 2021, allegedly, there was just under 60,000 dumps into nice areas of lakes.
No pun intended.
I know. I did a little giggle on the word when he said that. I thought I shouldn't have done that. It was a serious
Was
story.
I seriously up all night trying to work that one out? No. It just came out naturally. One quickie. I love this. We received 2 Christmas cards the week before last.
Yes, I had friends who had got their cards very, very recently.
And I thought I'd cracked it. I thought that's a great story because there's one better than that in the press this week. There was 2 friends fell out, right? In 1916 it was. 1916, they had an argument, they fell out. One lived in Crystal Palace, the other lived in Bath. So the one in Bath decided she needed to write an apology to the one in Crystal Palace. So she wrote a lovely letter saying, I'm really sorry, you know, our friendship's very important to me and I love you very much. And she posted it with the George V stamp, which cost a penny, 1916. It arrived last year. Believe it or not. So this poor woman who was waiting for this apology, she never got it, did she? Do you know what I mean? And it's now arrived. I mean, it's a farce, isn't it? The whole post office, for goodness sake.
But that's really quite
snail mail.
Snail mail.
But that really is sad, isn't it? If you were waiting, and these are 2 friends who could have got back together.
Absolutely.
Could have had friends, and then they never got this letter.
But the benefit is, the guy who got the letter in the same address, he's now got a 1 penny stamp.
That's what I was going to say, yeah.
So there's always a plus to it.
Yeah, always a silver lining.
Wow, fantastic. Glad to have you on. Kevin, Claire, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Now, coming up, what happens when a police officer falls for someone she shouldn't? We'll be speaking to an ex-officer whose story has inspired a new hit true crime podcast, Stolen Hearts. She's a policewoman. She ends up with what is he?
Armed robber.
An armed robber. Got to hear that story. It's unbelievable. Don't go anywhere.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. It's 11:24 and your views have been coming in thick and fast on everything we've been talking about today. Yvonne here says the decision will cripple the Welsh economy, and that's of the Welsh Government to stop those building of roads. It will grind freight traffic to a halt, thus adding to inflation of prices in Wales.
Yes, Ross says, completely ridiculous policy by Drakeford. What about people who have a disability who cannot go on public transport and rely on driving or being driven to where they need to go? Lots of people on that thing. We've also had lots of views about the BBC as well. Tim says, I only have a licence fee because I want to watch live football. I never watch any BBC channels. It's a shocking rip-off. And Duncan says, if they are that good, people would pay voluntarily. It's been forced to that people object to. People pay the licence fee because they're frightened of prosecution, not because they think it's good value.
And I've got one from Judith. This will make Philip's head swell, but I thought it was worth saying. He's our MP. Philip is our MP, and we think he's great.
Thank you, Judith.
I'll have a word with you later, Judith. We've contacted him, always gets in touch, and they think you're great.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you, Judith. That means a lot. Steve here, this is a good one. Steve says, hi, Esther and Phil. I have dreams every night about Rishi. They're called nightmares. So not quite in the Dear Deirdre camp.
And again, Sandra says, I live in rural Wales. I've never heard anything as stupid as stopping building roads. And Karen says, unfortunately, I'm disabled through MS. As a result, I'm in a wheelchair. And the only way I can leave home is in my 12-year-old diesel wheelchair accessible vehicle. I could never afford to buy another car. You see, these are all the things really the government should be thinking about, isn't it? Just a load of nonsense there. Well, this, our next story, I tell you, I can't wait to speak to this woman because it's extraordinary, absolutely case of catfishing, the practice, that is, of assuming a false background story in order to attract a romantic partner.
Jill Owens was a sergeant with Haverfordwest Police when she fell head over heels in love with Dean Jenkins and after a whirlwind romance became pregnant with his son. The only catch, Dean was a criminal and was jailed for 17 years for his involvement in an armed robbery. She tells us her story now. Jill, thank you very much indeed for joining us. This is a most remarkable story. I mean, what did you think? What did you think Dean's background was? I mean, what did he masquerade as being, and how were you taken in by it?
Good morning, both. Well, we met online. Had two sort of not unsuccessful marriages. So I thought, right, we'll try. I'll go online and have a look online, and met him via the online dating site, and everything seemed pretty normal. You know, I met his family. I went to his business. We did normal things that a normal dating couple would do. I met his business associates. We went abroad, you know, all the things that you would consider to be normal, we did until that night on Halloween.
I mean, it's quite shocking because not only was he an armed robber, he was also married. So you meeting his family and his people at his workplace, were they all in on his pretend life?
Well, this is the thing, because a lot of people have said, and it's a continuous common theme of, oh, she must have known. But the thing was, it wasn't as if I didn't meet any of his family or I didn't know anything about his life. As far as I was aware, there was nothing really that was missing. So I always pose the question, well, how could I have known? And then I'm told, well, your police training, you should have known through your police training. And I'm like, well, come on. You just wouldn't, if everything seems to be normal in a relationship, you wouldn't think, oh, well, he's not with me this weekend. He must be out robbing a bank.
Well, I have to say, I'm not thinking he's not with me this weekend, he's robbing a bank. You're quite right, I wouldn't think that. But I would have thought, as a police officer, you met somebody online, he says this, that, the other. I would have thought, you would have thought, well, I'm going to check him out a little bit more. Here's his name. Here's where he comes from. Can I do a little bit of a background check on him? Even with another... I don't know, do you not do that? Maybe I'm too suspicious.
Yeah. Well... Had I done that, I probably would have got disciplined because it would have been a misuse of the police computer. But, having had 2 failed relationships, it wasn't as if I sort of went into it blindly. And I'm not a silly person. I'm quite logical in the way I think. And there was nothing. Well, in fact, had I done a check on him, there would have been anything because he didn't have a criminal record at all. There was no record of him at all. So that wouldn't have helped.
So how did you find out? What happened to alert you to who he was and what he was about?
The night I found out was Halloween, and he'd been quiet.
Okay.
He hadn't returned my phone call. And that was very unusual for him because he was very communicative via phone and all the time. So I hadn't heard anything, and then that evening went through to Halloween the next day, and then I had a text message from his sister saying, you need to go to a phone box and call me. And it was unusual in itself. It's like, phone box? Why do I need to go to a phone box? But because I hadn't heard from him and it was so unusual, I went to the phone box. I told the children at home, I've got to go and buy some milk. And I went to the phone box. And that's when I was told, there's been an armed robbery. One of them has been shot dead by the police. I didn't know who. And I was like, what on earth is going on? That is the last thing that you would expect to hear.
So while you were dating him, he was planning the armed robbery. So while you were dating, he was planning, and then he did it. That's why you didn't see him, and that's how you found out.
Well, as it turned out, I mean, I found out all this information subsequently. I didn't know at the time, but he would be calling me before he did the armed robbery, and also after. So every time he did them, so I was being called before and after. Well, I didn't know where he was. He was in London, but I didn't know that he was calling me before and after the armed robbery. So of course, I'm sort of like, when I was told that, I was like, well, of course that I'm going to be investigated because, that's huge. That's a huge thing. But I just didn't know. I did not have a clue. And even if I look back now, if I look back now.
Go ahead, Jill.
I was just going to say, even if I look back now and people say, well, and you look back, did you see anything? No, nothing at all. Nothing at all would have alerted me to what was coming.
Now, am I right in thinking that you had to leave the police force as a result of this, Jill? Because if you did, why was that? Because as far as I can see, you're a victim here. So why did you no longer could stay in the police?
Well, Dyfed-Powys Police felt that I should have known that he was a criminal. They felt that I brought the force into disrepute by association. Of course, we have our son, Frankie, together, and there would always be that connection. And obviously an armed robber and a police officer do not mix together. So as a result of that, the hearing, I wrote a book, Two Cops and a Robber, and the whole story of the hearing is within that book. But there was a lot of sort of inconsistencies then in the police's case. If you read the book, you'll find out. And as a result of that hearing, I was required to resign. So it wasn't just a failed relationship, it was my whole life.
We can't hear it all now, but I know what happened. You ended up then as a single mum. You had 2 kids. You then had your kid with him. I know you were visiting him in prison. I know you're no longer with him, but life moves on. So what we want to say, because lots of people want to hear the full story, because it's unbelievable. It's Stolen Hearts podcast, and you can listen to that Incredible story. Make it into a film, Jill, because I know I want to watch it. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
And we'll be buying the book as well, Jill. We'll be buying the book. Thank you so much. Unbelievable story. Now, how do you deal with the pressures of having 89 million people follow you on TikTok? We'll be talking to the dad of sensation, Addison Rae. But first, it's time for your latest headlines with Aaron.
Thank you very much. It's 11:33. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is expected to urge Western leaders to double down on military support for Ukraine. Rishi Sunak, who's in Munich for a security conference, will tell allies Ukraine needs advanced NATO standard capabilities to counter Russian aggression. The conference is being held days before the first anniversary of Moscow's invasion. The Prime Minister will also discuss the Northern Ireland Protocol in Germany. Rishi Sunak, who was greeted by the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, is expected to hold talks with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on the sidelines of the summit. There's growing speculation an agreement between the UK and the EU is close and could be unveiled early next week. The body of former Premier League footballer Christian Atsu has been recovered in Turkey. His agent has confirmed the Ghanaian, who played for Newcastle, Chelsea and Everton, was found almost 2 weeks after the earthquakes. More than 45,000 people have been killed in Turkey and Syria. This morning, a child was among 3 people rescued 296 hours after the first quake struck. One of the UK's richest people, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, has reportedly joined the race to buy Manchester United. It comes as Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, the chairman of one of Qatar's biggest banks, confirmed his bid to acquire the club from the Glazers. Sir Jim's previously expressed his desire to buy United, the club he supported since he was a boy, although there's been no formal comment from his company, Ineos. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Right now, it's back to Esther and Phil.
When over 89 million people follow your every move and dance, how does this affect your family's life? In the last year, social media sensation Addison Rae found fame on TikTok, and we're delighted to be joined by her father, Monty Lopez, who also has achieved fame on TikTok. He's here to tell us more. Now, your daughter has something like 89 million followers. I couldn't even comprehend that many. You are not doing too badly yourself. You've got, I think it's over 5 million viewers. So I want to know, has TikTok taken over your life?
TikTok has. I actually was in the real estate industry for the last 20 years. And in July of 2019, she downloaded the app. We all started playing on it as a family. And then before you know it, it took a life of its own. So we ended up moving to California in December of 2019, and, you know, we've been there since.
How did Addison get to 89 million followers? I mean, does it just happen by accident, or do you have to have a sort of a plan to get there?
You know, it's kind of like a little strategy we put together on working it. You know, everybody was putting in a little effort, putting in a little time, you know, doing dances, doing little skits, you know, enjoying life, and it kind of just all came together. And the more we worked at it, the bigger it got, and then here we are today.
So, I mean, at what stage did you think this has gone from a little bit of dancing, a little bit of, I don't know, showing family photos or whatever you're doing? When did you professionalise it, or do you professionalise it? When did you say, this is now my life, it's my business, it's what we do and how we earn our money?
And whenever we, it kind of happened right away, you know, like right in the beginning in January when we all started kind of getting together and working on the app, and it started growing at a substantial rate. And then we just put a little more time and effort into it.
So do you have an agent? Did an agent come in? Does a TV producer come and help you? Is people writing scripts for you?
That's actually when I noticed it was becoming something that could really be something, is when we all sat down and actually signed with William Morris Endeavor. So once we all signed with WME, I took a little time off of work. I was working with Clayton Homes, which we were in real estate for, like I said, the last 20 years. And then once we signed with WME, it gave me an outlet. You know, it gave me an opportunity to see there's an opportunity for growth. So we just, you know, focused all our time and energy into it, and then grew from there.
I mean, what do you think as a dad? I mean, look, when my kids are playing on their phones all the time, it drives me absolutely crackers. You know, I'm always saying, you know, put those phones down, stop, you know, do something more worthwhile. Do you, is there not part of you that thinks, do you know what, I wish that, you know, Addison wasn't on the phone all the time or doing all this stuff all the time? Is that, does it ever irritate you that she does that?
It does become a bit overwhelming because there's a lot of online hate or there's a lot of online scrutiny, you know, so if you're not doing something that somebody's satisfied with or happy with, they could be upset with it, and so you got to make sure you give people credit for a dance, or you have to make sure you're doing the right hashtags and kind of just growing the network that you're putting together.
Now, I believe we showed some of your TikToks there, but I believe somebody was making a gesture, and I need to apologise for that. We didn't realise that was going out, because usually it's wholesome family stuff there. What I'm interested in, how much money can you make? And how do you know you can make money? Because you're working in real estate. I don't know if you are anymore. But so what is it? I mean, how lucrative can this be?
It just depends on how you monetize it and what you turn it into.
Well, you tell us, how are you monetizing it?
You just
look
for brand deals, and you look for opportunities to get into other forms of entertainment, where we've dabbled into the music industry and we've looked into the movie industry. We've did a reality series on one of the social media platforms. So it just gives it an opportunity for growth.
Oh, OK. So you're not making money, as it were, from the TikToking. It's the opportunities that unfold from there.
Well, TikTok actually pays you for views also. So the more views you get, the money you can make from TikTok sometimes could be, you know, substantial. Sometimes it's not enough to do anything with. So it just depends on the amount of views you're getting.
There's lots of people in this country worry about TikTok and its relationship with the Chinese state and what they do with the information. Does any of that bother you or not?
I think it's bothered everyone around the world's concerned about it. You know, it's a lot of your privacy that's taken away from you. You know, you can't go anywhere or, you know, be out in the public without getting noticed or recognized. You know, like I'm staying in a part of London right now where it's, you know, it's a little courtyard, and, you know, I go down in the courtyards and I'm watching the shows, and before you know it, it's, you know, it's a crowd of people around me instead of watching the entertainment that's going on. So it's pretty exciting.
I also wonder, you know, your daughter's got 89 million followers. You've got over 5 million followers. Do you ever have sort of inter-family rivalry? Who's got the most followers today, or who's got the most likes?
No, not necessarily. You know, it's just all fun and games. And like I said, it gives you an opportunity to get out there and explore different things. Like I said, I'm out here in London for the next week. You know, I'm going to go to 2 fashion shows tonight. And, you know, it gives you a lot of opportunity for growth.
And what's the future for both you and your daughter? What's the future?
I've opened up a marketing agency just recently. It's bamsocial.co, and that is an agency that helps you grow your online presence. So what I've done is I've took it and sent it in a different direction where we can help people build their accounts.
So it has. When I said TikTok had taken over your life, in a way, it has. It's your money, it's your life, it's what you do in your spare time, and it's now your business. But it's given you opportunities. So thank you very much indeed, Monty, for joining us today. I could only dream of having
89 million. I can't get my head around 89 million followers. It's more than the entire population of the United Kingdom. It's absolutely staggering. Monty, thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
Now, coming up after the break, first it was work from home, now it's work 4 days. We'll be speaking to MP Peter Dowd about his hopes to change the working week. So stay with us.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pearce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 11:43. Labour MP Peter Dowd has been campaigning for a 4-day working week without any loss of pay, and a trial has been taking place in the UK and across Europe.
Is this too good to be true? Can the economy cope with such a radical change? Well, Peter Dowd joins us now.
Good morning.
Hi there, Peter.
Morning.
I thought you were taking a day off there and not joining us. That was one of your days off. So this, I guess, what is it, sort of, what's it they've been doing across Europe? This trial across Europe. How's it gone?
Well, the results are actually out on Tuesday, as a matter of fact, and on Tuesday afternoon in the House of Commons. The results are being announced. There'll be people there to take us through what those results are from the pilot, and question and answer session as to how it's gone. So it's just about to be announced, as I said, on Tuesday. But generally, it looks like 4-day weeks tend to increase productivity, lower absenteeism, recruitment and retention tends to be better. So overall, and this is not just locally, this is on an international level, so generally, it seems to be pretty positive, pretty productive, and beneficial. That's what the evidence seems to indicate.
Now, Peter, you know, my dad always said to me, if something sounds too good to be true, then it is too good to be true. Lots of people might be thinking the same thing here. What would you say to them?
Well, you know what? It's a fair comment, Phil, insofar as people do believe that. But that's what they said about the weekend, because remember, people used to work basically 7 days a week. They used to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week. We never had, if you want, official weekends. We never used to have paid holiday money, fair, you know, equal pay for women. All those things were said at the time that would affect the economy. You know, giving a worker a weekend off or a day off, oh, that'll affect the economy. We won't be able to afford it. And it really never proves to be the case. The same was said about the minimum pay, wasn't it? That the economy would go into nosedive if we had a minimum pay. So history doesn't show that, to be fair, in all these advances in terms of working days and practices.
So I think the bit that... so I've got a kind of 2 questions here. So first of all, you've got the fact that you're getting the same pay for 4 days rather than 5 days. So what do businesses think about that? Because that's fundamentally increasing their costs by a significant amount.
Well, of course, but to some extent, that's the whole point about it being offset by productivity gains, the whole question about recruitment and retention. The benefits that actually come from that 4-day working week isn't just about the employer having to cough up, if you want, an extra day's pay for no work. It's about the benefits that the business overall and in the round, and financially, of course, get from introducing that. And I suppose that's the whole point.
Yeah, so you're saying there's a 20%, which is phenomenal if there is. You're saying roughly a 20% increase in productivity. So my other question, because I said there was 2, I'm now thinking children go to school like 5 days a week. People only working 4 days a week. Are we saying kids are only going to school now for 4 days a week, so it's going to impact their education? Or are we bringing in a new set of teachers for the 5th day week?
No, I think it's spread over effectively it would be spread over 5 days. So it's like anything. I might work Monday to Wednesday or Thursday, and you'd work from Tuesday to Friday. So you'd spread that over a period of time. And that, to some extent, as well, inevitably. I don't want to sort of say Company X should run it in this way and Company Y runs it in that way. I think that's the whole point, in a sense, of a pilot, because you propose an issue. You've done this in the past. You propose something, but then you want to have the evidence which is there to make the proposal.
Well,
then
the cost of schooling is going to go up, isn't it? Because you've got an extra set of teachers.
Peter, the question I've got, you mentioned lots of other developments that happened in the past, which I thought was a particularly fair point to make. But most of those are backed up by the law, and the law's changed. Is this something that you would just want to encourage businesses to do, or is this something that you would envisage being introduced by law that companies would have to abide by?
Yeah, well, I think ever the way there are companies who already operate a 4-day week at the moment. There are a number of companies that operate a 4-day week. So I think companies would be an advantage to the companies to do that, without being pushed, so to speak. But inevitably in these situations, to have something of a level playing field, you know this, you introduce legislation which sets out that level playing field, because we already have a maximum working week already, in a way. We already have the working time directive and rules. So we already have legislative frameworks for most of these things, and this would just be adding to that legislative framework.
So, some jobs it's not quite so easy, is it? I mean, if I can understand, you can be much more productive, for example, in an office job or whatever. If you're as I used to be, sat on the checkouts in a supermarket, it's very difficult to see how you can be any more productive in order to justify only working 4 days for the same pay. So, would you be excluding people like that from these provisions?
No, not necessarily, because there are retailers who are already taking part in this pilot, and it'd really be very interesting to find out the example you've just given, Phil, about, well, how is that operated? How has that worked within retail? But you already know, and I already know, retail has gone down the path in many situations of the checkouts, which are automatic. We all use them, don't we? So I'm not trying to prescribe that supermarket X should do this and business Y should do that and finance institute should do this and banks should do that, because there's a bank taking part in this as well. IT companies. So there's a range of organisations taking part in this, and let's see what comes out of that to help us lay the ground.
Peter Dowd, thank you so much indeed for taking the time to join us, and we'll look forward to seeing the results early next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Now, I was looking, 5-day week was brought in 1932 after the Great Depression, and that was to give more people work because they needed to. We're in a very different situation now. We've got 1.3 million, haven't we, job vacancies. And I'm just wondering if you're taking, in a way, more people out the workplace.
You're going back to the 6-day week, are you? Is that?
Well, I'm not saying that either, but we're trying to find people, not give them... Anyway, I saw also 3/4 of Express readers thought that this was the last thing that the country needed, just sort of let you know.
Anyway, let's take a look at the biggest stories from the world of sport and showbiz with the wonderful Hayley Palmer and not so wonderful Aidan McGee.
That's standard now.
It is, of course, absolutely. I can't resist it, I'm afraid, Hayley. Rod Stewart, Hayley.
Yes. First of all, I just want to say, Esther, I love your jacket. And Phil, you need to get the sparkles on for next week.
Well, do you know what? As I had a cold at the moment, I thought I wasn't sparkling from within. So I thought if I sparkled from without, I could camouflage.
It's doing the trick. We'll work on you, Phil. You're a work in progress. But yeah, Rod Stewart. Yes, his audition tape. He's put up for auction, or his manager has, and that was the audition tape that secured his record deal. Apparently it's going for about £500 to £1,000, and apparently in his audition he wanted Elton John to play the piano, but Elton John wasn't well.
That sounds quite cheap.
That's what I was thinking.
Is it? I mean, is this part of sort of music history that you're going... are people going to make a killing here?
I don't know, but I think sometimes it's nice to keep hold of those things. Like, do we want to auction things off like that when that's very sentimental? I'd want to hold on to it if I could sing and I was Rod Stewart.
Maybe he thought he was going to get more money for it.
Yeah, maybe.
He doesn't really need the money, does he?
He really doesn't, no.
To be perfectly honest. Now, Aidan.
I've got an Elton John joke.
Oh, no.
It's a little bit funny.
That was good. Put it
That
here.
was actually good.
Yeah, we like that one.
That actually made me laugh a little bit.
Don't encourage him, but I like that one.
Anyway, Manchester United. It looks
Yes.
as if everybody's wanting to buy them.
Well, not everyone so far. We've seen two...
Not everybody's got that much
No, not
money
really. No,
to
no.
be
Speak for
able to
yourself.
buy
It's fine.
them.
We'll expect your bid on Monday.
Yeah, exactly,
No, last night we saw Sir James Radcliffe put his bid on the table. We don't know the amount, but he will be requiring support from JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, the big boys in the city. And we saw Ineos... sorry, the Ineos is Sir James Radcliffe, isn't it? No, we saw a Qatar bid as well. Now, they already own PSG in France. It's going to be difficult because you can't own two teams in European competition. So what they've done to get around it and to distance themselves from the Qatari royal family is they've said that this guy, Jassim bin Jaber El Thani, who's actually known to his friends as JBJ, they've made out that he's an individual financier, and so he's buying it himself. So that's how they could circumvent the rules. So that bid's worth £4 billion. The bids are going to go in low to start with, because yesterday the New York Stock Exchange valued Man United at £3.9 billion. The merchant bankers who are selling the club think they can get between 7 and 8. The Glazers are believed to want to settle for about 5 and 6. That's why I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Probably in the summer, I would have thought. But yeah, I think they're going to get taken over. There's no doubt about that.
And it was a big game in the Premier League last week when Man City beat Arsenal.
Yeah, I know. It was excellent. But I mean, Man City had 36% possession, hardly any of the ball. But that's how you win football matches these days.
Well, I'm more interested in celebrities who failed their driving licence.
Yeah, this was...
Driving test. Sorry, driving
This
test.
was really interesting because I was looking at the article in Hello magazine and they had people like Justin Bieber had apparently failed first time, Scarlett Moffat, and would you believe Jenson Button failed his driving test?
Was it for speeding?
I was going to say that. Was he going too
passed
fast?
first time, Jenson Button.
Can I tell you what happened in mine? Seriously. I actually was told to take... This is absolutely true. I was told to take the next available left. I drove into an NCP car park and had to pay £1 to get out.
That'll be the that hurt him the most. Having to pay the £1 to get out of the car park. That's the bit of the...
Do you know what? That was like 2 Stormer jokes today. One was real, one was a joke
So are we taking it you failed your driving test?
Yes, I did that time. Yeah. I took it 12 years later, yeah, and I passed.
12 years?
Yeah, I was scarred by it, yeah, it's losing the quid.
So just your second time, you passed the
I did,
second
yeah.
time.
There were 12 years between the two.
First time?
First time.
Second time.
Yeah.
Oh, so girl power
The boys both had to do it.
Of course we passed first
All the
time.
best drivers pass the second time.
I remember saying...
Did you deliberately try and be super duper demure when you went for a test? Did you try and make yourself look really demure and therefore...
No, I just went like Hayley Palmer style and I was like, I'm going to pass. Like I knew I was going to pass before it even happened. Law of assumption, you assume it's going to be
my mum
okay.
my mum was like, now make sure you don't look like you're a rock check or you don't look like you're going to go out and you've got to make sure you look like more like a, I don't know, working in the library.
Are you suggesting it's not all based on driving ability?
No, well, anyway, look, we've got chatting amongst ourselves. Aidan, Hayley, thank you very much indeed. We've had a cracking show today, a really diverse show, and thank you for joining us. Well, that's it for us this week, but don't go anywhere, because next is Alistair Stewart and Friends, which this week is being hosted by Nicholas Owen.
Hello there. Welcome to your Met Office forecast. I'm Craig Snell. So here's the situation for this weekend. Still some rain around, especially across the north of the country, but for the south, it's certainly going to remain very mild. So here's the situation at the moment. We've had a couple of areas of low pressure move through overnight. This one will still continue to track its way eastwards as we go through Saturday. So into this afternoon, we've still got a weather front just lingering across the very far south of the UK, and then this next area of rain just moving into southern Scotland as the afternoon goes on. In between, and also across the very far north of Scotland, we will see some bright spells and certainly a calmer day for north east Scotland compared to Friday. But in the sunshine across the Midlands into East Anglia, we could see highs reaching 14, 15, possibly even 16 degrees. So another very mild day to come. Into this evening, the band of rain across Scotland will gradually work its way into the North Sea. This will allow some clearer and colder conditions to develop, so we could see a few icy patches come Sunday morning. Elsewhere, a cooler night than of late, but still on the mild side. Temperatures generally staying up into the mid-single figures. So we start the day on a fairly quiet note across the south, but further north we have this band of rain which will gradually work its way across Scotland as the day goes on, turning quite heavy and persistent